If you're ready to stop feeling like shit and start living your best life, then this podcast is for you. Tune in as Dr. Buzz and Daniela provide guidance, education, and the tools you need to make a positive and lasting change. Doctor of Chiropractic Medicine, Regenerative Medicine, and Functional Wellness, Dr. Buzz has 24 years of experience changing people's lives. Daniela has first-handedly taken back control of her health, and together, these dynamic hosts have unique perspectives and expert advice. Get ready to transform your mindset, take charge of your well-being, and discover the key to changing your life forever. Welcome to Stop Feeling Like Shit, where the power to change is in your hands.
Welcome back to Stop Feeling Like Shit podcast. As your host, Daniela Korth, and I'm here with Dr. Buzz. And our special guest today, welcome back, Nick Andrews. And for all of you who are tuning in today, we're going to be talking about concussions and TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. And if you're tuning in and you don't know who Nick is, Nick's going to give us a little brief background about who he is and where he comes from and why.
Thank you, Daniela.
You're welcome.
So started out in the biopharma industry for about 20 years, kind of stereotypical background, and then some personal health challenges, a shoulder injury from downhill mountain biking. Didn't have a lot of good answers from mainstream medicine at the time, and given my background, knew there were a lot of non-mainstream niches out there, but I just never really explored them. Like most people, like you get by well enough, you're not just going to go searching under the couch for every, little dust mote there just because.
Not until it's an emergency.
Yep, pretty much until you have a really good motivation. But being told you need a joint replacement in a few years and you're in your 30s tends to motivate you. So start diving down into those rabbit holes, trying to figure out what's real, what's not, because coming from ground zero, as we all know, because we've all been there at some point, is you're like, is this all snake oil? Is this real? Like, what's real, what's not? And
right.
There's no easy way to tell until you just dive in and educate yourself. So address some of my personal health issues, and that kind of really got me started down the rabbit hole and was like, hold on, there's a lot.
This stuff works.
And there are a lot of effective answers that mainstream doesn't seem to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of guinea pigs too, right? You're a guinea pig.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say everything we do here at the offices, I always do myself first. Mm-hmm. And if it helps me, then I bring it in. So in a way, I'm kind of selfish because all the tools I have, I've always started at my house first, on my family members or even my dog. And then if it works on them, then we'll bring it to the office. If it doesn't work, it doesn't make the cut.
That's the funny thing. It's fundamentally... That's really the only way to do it. Not looking to get into the politics of it, but just the reality of it. Look at the replication crisis in published studies. Look at cholesterol, right? The original studies were essentially falsified by selectively choosing data. They redid essentially all the original studies back around 2000, 2001, showed statins, in the vast majority of cases, don't benefit you.
Right.
And that it's just a whole game, right? You can see that with therapeutic compound after therapeutic compound. So, people don't like to hear that, but it takes away the easy answer of, oh, well, there's a study or the doctor said. Well, maybe not. And then you just get into the aspect of biological diversity. What a lot of people don't realize, and this is still controversial, is around 2000, pharmaceutical companies realized that certain ethnicities responded different to different drugs.
That's logical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, it might have been Merck. I forget exactly which company it was. They were trying to launch a new heart medication for critical cases, somebody experiencing a heart attack. And they found that it only seem to work in one or two ethnicities and not in others. So, you have the whole aspect of natural biological diversity and even within similar ethnic groups, how some people are fine with some foods and not with others, right?
Right.
So, unfortunately, there is no easy answer.
No, and I think we're all on the same page as far as the treatments and things we try to do. We really try to fix the root cause of problems and not just give a. And I know society a lot of times is problem and then pill solution, and it's really that never really works out. When people have problems, there's always a root cause, and go to the root cause, and you can usually do that with natural stuff, right? And when I say natural stuff, hormones, peptides, those are all natural. They're not, they're
Yeah.
not synthetic. You're replacing what the body doesn't have anymore with exactly what it needs. Instead of with a lot of the drugs out there are totally synthetic, and the body knows it. And although it may help with the symptom, there's also side effects because it's not natural to the body. And I think, along those lines today, we're going to talk about concussions and TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, which is a huge problem in society. I think that, last year there was between 1.7 and 3, they guess 1.7 to 3 million concussions in the United States. But the problem is 50% of them go undiagnosed. And both of our kids have played sports. Is it playing football when I was younger? You got your bell rung, you come out, the coach is like, "Are you okay?" Even if you're not, you don't want to be a wimp.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm good. I mean, how often does it happen? And it's not just football; it's soccer. Like I saw, you had a video of your son earlier today, like getting dumped on his head as a goalie. Lacrosse, all these sports, there's the potential to get concussions, and they estimate this year 2 out of every 10 high school athletes will have a concussion of some type. And just to be clear, the difference between a concussion and a traumatic brain injury, because they're similar but different. A traumatic brain injury is a brain injury that causes dysfunction. A concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury. A concussion is when your brain hits the inside of your skull, which happens, rapid acceleration, like a car accident can happen. If you're wearing a helmet and, basically anytime your brain is sitting in the sac inside of your skull, if it hits the inside of your skull, which can happen with rapid acceleration, deceleration, that's a concussion. And the problem is when these are misdiagnosed or diagnosed quickly, they can lead to a lot of long-term, really negative effects.
Mm-hmm.
So diagnosing them quickly is very important, and then treating them aggressively is also very important, because undiagnosed and untreated can lead to lots of long-term, mood disorders, ADHD, seizures. There's all these bad effects that happen over time that can be totally preventative, treated in the beginning. And I think you did a really good analogy earlier. A concussion is kind of like a sunburn. So right when the incident happens is the most important time if you can catch it right away, because if you don't, it just kind of cooks up and gets worse and worse with time. Is that correct?
Yeah. So both a concussion and a sunburn are very similar from a process perspective, in that for the end result to fully manifest, to fully develop, there's actually a cascade of events that lead up to that. Yes, they were triggered by the initial thing. So in the case of sunburn, I sat out in midday sun too long, right? So the initial inflammation cascade, so the fundamental of sunburn is you're exposed to too much UV radiation relative to what your skin is used to tolerating. It essentially causes cell damage, which causes an inflammation cascade. That cascade has to go through multiple levels before you get the stereotypical sunburn. The redness, the soreness, sometimes a little puffy depending on how bad it is. All those are actually downstream effects of the initial event, which was the excessive UV exposure. A concussion is similar. So the brain impacts the inside of the skull. That triggers a series of cascades. What we call the concussion, the observable effects of it, from whether it's a headache, whether it's confusion or temporary slower processing, many, many aspects it can manifest in. But outside of very extreme cases, those take a little bit to fully develop. Like, my son, took a pretty good shot to the head the other day, and his bell was wrong. He came off the field and was like, whoa, what happened? But you could see a few hours later, like, oh, my head's starting to really hurt. You could see his processing slowing down, of like having to think, but really think before speaking.
Is that the inflammation?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
So you get a series of cascades, which it can actually begin to interact with how the actual neurons themselves are connected. Inflammation cascade is the easiest way to describe it, but in the case of
neuroplasticity, right? It decreases neuroplasticity. Yep.
So, like sunburn, for example, anybody listening to this has probably heard of the peptide GHKCU. Used topically, if you apply it right after you come in out of the sun, a lot of times sunburns will never fully develop.
Because you're stopping the cascade.
Right. GHK is actually working at the cellular level and essentially changing the path of this signaling cascade from inflammation to regeneration. So inflammation is not always bad. That's what we always hear is, oh, inflammation is bad. Inflammation has a purpose. It's just if it goes too far, it can become counterproductive. Mm-hmm. So in the case of a sunburn, GHKCU redirects the cascade to the more productive path. Mm-hmm. So in the case of concussions, it's interesting that some of this stuff isn't done more because some of it's super easy.
So I think with concussions, I mean, I feel it's almost still like, we had this conversation. It's almost still like back. Like I don't feel like the technology or the treatment has really advanced much because I think they are better at diagnosing in the beginning. I feel like a lot of coaches are, but then really the treatment is we're not going to pull you out of the game. They're not doing anything proactively to really stop that cascade other than you're just not going to play anymore today. And I think that's important to now that there are options out there to do these things because. If your kid's playing high school football, we'll say for an example, if they're going to play from Pee-wee to senior year, they're going to suffer multiple concussions.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a reality. And if those go untreated, that could lead to them having mental, who knows what having depression when they get older, learning disorders can turn into ADHD, all these things. You hear it all the time with students that were a good student and all of a sudden now they're not a good student. Well, what changed?
Yeah. Look how common you have associations with aggression issues. And it's not so much that, that person's just hyper aggressive. Like, no, nobody knows exactly, but there are studies done that point that we know this is absolutely occurring is that some non-trivial portion of that is accumulated essentially TBI.
Probably more than you know. I think that's kind of they're kind of slow playing that because the ramifications for the NFL and for a lot of sports could be, it could bankrupt those leagues, right? So. They've been slow play, but I know like Junior Seau is a football player we talked about that was a really good player, and I think he killed his wife or killed.
Yeah, he did.
But then he donated his brain, and had a bunch of multiple concussions. Yep. But you really can only diagnose those is if you donate your brain when you die. So a lot of those guys. So, but any kid playing football or even like soccer, as a parent, you really got to be aware of these things, and if there's options out there, which there are now, which we'll talk about. It's really important to treat them, really quickly as possible. And then if you miss it, still do the treatment afterwards because you don't want your kids to have those long-term effects.
Well, so you have a couple windows there. Kind of like a sunburn, right? Is if there's something you can use in a fairly short period after the initial, we'll say, stimuli. In the case of sun, UV exposure and concussion, head impact. So with most medical interventions, right? Think of it if you break your leg. Well, hey, if we set it right away, it sucks, but it's not necessarily a big problem. If it's just left as the raw break for a month before you do something about it, well, now you have a really, more challenging situation to deal with.
Still got to set it, but it's just it's more complicated.
Right. To take one step back, though, what's interesting is there are a handful of really simple things that could already be done, especially for kids, which I'm kind of surprised they don't. So, for instance, ketones. Once again, probably anybody listening to this is familiar with ketones.
But if not, what are they?
So, ketones are a class of molecule your body both makes and uses. They can act as an alternative energy source for your cells as opposed to glucose and carbohydrates. When your body burns ketone, your body's normal primary energy source is glucose. Everybody's heard of fasting, ketogenic diets. That's referring to ketones because as access to glucose is reduced, your body switches to ketones as a fuel source. Ketones are usually derived from fatty acids.
Yep.
You can also take exogenous ketones, meaning you can buy the little packet of ketone powder that you put in a drink and drink. So what's interesting is, this is documented in multiple places, is that ketones actually are protective against concussion. So, and like I said, it's getting back to the replication issue. One way around that is has this been looked at multiple places by multiple people and similar answers? In the case of ketones, that is the case. You do see that. So you can take it to an extreme. For example, they've done studies that are really fascinating. If as soon as you have somebody have a head impact, have them begin fasting for about 24 hours, and basically a true fast, nothing but water and or electrolytes for the next 24 hours, it has a major impact on how the concussion develops or not develops in this case. Nobody likes fasting, right? So another way to kind of get around that is, somebody has an impact, hey, here, just drink these ketones that taste just like Gatorade. And it doesn't completely undo it. It's not magic, but that alone can have a significant impact on how it develops.
Wow.
And I know we've also been working with some veterans groups, and we're doing a study now with auto cases using NAD and glutathione to treat concussions. Maybe you could explain a little bit the mechanism on that, because we've seen some really good results.
Yeah, so ketones are like the kiddie pool of things you can do. They're not magic. They absolutely help, but they're probably not going to be an absolute game changer, especially in a severe head impact. But when you get into NAD plus and glutathione, as you mentioned before, to significantly simplify it, a lot of a concussion comes down to an inflammation cascade. In a sunburn, the inflammation cascade is in your skin, your dermis, so it takes one form, one presentation. In the case of your brain, it takes a very different presentation, which leads to a concussion. So glutathione on its own is often referred to as the master anti-inflammatory of the human body. So it plays a role in so many processes. It's wild in protecting your body. So, for example, directly with regard to concussions, one aspect of a concussion is an oxidation cascade. So you can think of oxidation, reactive oxygen species. People have probably heard of that.
I think the way I like to explain that, what oxidation is and why it's bad, is kind of like when you have an avocado, and it's nice and green, and you open it up and it turns brown. That's oxidation.
Yep.
The same thing can happen to your cells.
Yeah. Another way I explain it is, think of it as the exhaust out of a car. So your cells are producing energy using NAD, producing ATP. That's the engine running to produce the energy. And then the oxidants, reactive oxygen species, those are the exhaust products. Mm-hmm. So when you have certain types of trauma, for example, a head impact, those processes can run away for a number of reasons. So a crude analogy, imagine turning your car on and your garage door doesn't open and just leaving it in there, right?
Yeah, bad idea.
Yeah, a little bit's not going to kill you, but it's not good for you either. Same sort of thing from a biological perspective. It's not good for you, but the further that runs away, the longer you're sitting in that garage with the door closed, the worse the situation is getting.
Right.
So glutathione is essentially the master antioxidant. So that just by itself, the oxidant cascade is one of the big aspects. Not necessarily the primary one, but it is a core aspect of how concussions develop. Mm-hmm. So simply by addressing that from a glutathione perspective, and it does other things, but just this one aspect alone, realistically, I don't know if there's work out on this, but I would be willing to bet money. You do a study and do nothing but give people glutathione, and you would see an improvement in concussions relative to it just happened in an immediate acute situation. Like, oh, they just had this head impact within like the last 12 hours. Because there's a little bit of a difference there. But once again, like a sunburn, did it just happen and is the process still developing, or is it something that happened a month ago?
Right.
Because, not to bounce around analogies, but now coming to the broken leg, same sort of thing. you're going to treat a break that just happened today or yesterday different than something that happened a month ago that you're just
Right.
now trying to address.
Mm-hmm.
I think that window with concussions is really quickly. So, ideally, if you're like during the game, if someone gets injured, like treating them immediately, if that would be ideal, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so we were talking about my son earlier. He had a pretty significant head impact in a soccer game the other day, and it was clear that we were in concussion territory. It ended up flipping in the air and literally landing on his head, coming down on the ground. And within about an hour, you could tell, he's processing a little slower. Like, hey, my head's really hurting. You could just tell he was kind of off.
Yeah.
And later that day, as soon as he got home, got an iontophoresis patch, NAD plus glutathione iontophoresis patch on him. Day and night effect. And that's a case of, hey, before it can fully develop, because 4 to 6 hours, a concussion is not fully developed yet. I mean, I don't know what the exact number is. My personal guess, I'd probably say you have a solid 8 to 12 hour window before the process has really kind of gone all the way down the food chain there.
Right.
But going to NAD, as we were kind of talking about in one of our previous discussions, a good way to, at least in my opinion, to understand NAD is think of it as the fuel for the power plant for a city. If for whatever reason the power plant, the mitochondria, are struggling, whether it's due to the trauma of a head impact or any other laundry list of issues.
It's inflammation that causes that from the impact that causes the mitochondria to slow down, or what's your take on that?
So there are multiple factors. So literally in some cases the shock wave from the impact can disrupt neuronal connections, which can ultimately lead to a glutamate cascade, and that actually causes cellular toxicity.
Gotcha.
So you can actually end up with this weird situation of suddenly cells are creating their own toxic environment.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense.
So and there are reasons for it. It's not like, oh my God, they don't know what they're doing. It is related to a defense mechanism, but like a lot of things, sometimes those can get out of hand.
Right.
So, like inflammation. Inflammation is actually, you need that as part of your immune response. Not just for healing, but it's actually part of an immune response. So if you were to completely shut down all inflammation in your body, you would fall apart. You would get sick very easily. You wouldn't heal for anything. But like everything else, there's a sweet spot. Some is good. It's Goldilocks.
Right.
Too hot, too cold, just right.
Mm-hmm.
So with NAD in this case, your body's pretty wild if you really think about it. Your body knows how to heal or regenerate virtually every single aspect of your physiology. Things that, researchers are still like, we don't really understand this. And
Right.
Your body just goes and does it, right? But in a lot of cases, whether it's because of aging or a specific dysfunction or whatever, sometimes your body needs a little help. We may not fully understand each step along the mechanism of the way, but in the case of a concussion, you can look at, coming back to the power plant analogy of, there was an earthquake. Sorry, I know I do a million analogies, but think of a concussion as like an earthquake for mitochondria, right? So power plant struggling, there was a big earthquake, right? So now part of the city's browning out. Well, if we can give it something so it can start pumping power back out, now all those downstream processes can correct themselves.
I think the advantage of the ionto is with antiphoresis for NAD and glutathione is you can't overdose with it, and the body's going to use what it needs and discard what it doesn't.
Oh, that is the awesome thing about iontophoresis, is any of the patches out on the market, outside of some extreme scenario, you can't load enough on there that could be pushed through the skin fast enough to oversaturate the bloodstream.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably one of the most foolproof ways to do it. Generally
And it's
speaking,
safe for kids to use also.
right? You're not breaking the skin. It's really from a end user perspective, whether it's a kid, a parent, a trainer, a coach, anybody. Yeah, it's functionally no different than KT tape.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes, it's basically putting a Band-Aid on.
Yeah, a big fancy Band-Aid.
Yeah, so I think, if you're a parent out there listening, just realize that, if your kid's playing sports, 50% of concussions are misdiagnosed or not diagnosed is the most important term there, right? So it's really important, that number one, you explain to your children the importance of if you get your bell rung, don't be, there's long-term effects. It can lead to not being able to focus. It can change your personality. Even long-term neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, potentially, right? So if you get a bunch of these things, so it's very important that if it happens, let your coach know or let somebody know. And I think it's also a good idea to have in your toolbox. These NAD and glutathione patches are available for people. That really the ideal thing would be that the coach or the parent would have it on the sideline. You put on right away. But if it's the day after the game and they're still feeling groggy or have headaches, go see a provider that uses this technology, because if it's cooking after 24 hours, it's a problem.
Well, and realistically, just not everybody will be familiar with the technology or have access to a provider who's familiar with it. Personal opinion here, not medical advice or anything like that by any means, but honestly, just going with a higher oral dose of glutathione and either NNM, NR, NAD plus, honestly, is going to help.
Yep.
How much, that's an unknown, but it is going to help.
Yeah, I think the main thing is just know that concussions are real.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are left untreated, they do lead to serious long-term effects.
And I do want to say we did have a doctor who he was mountain bike riding, and he fell, got a head concussion. Then what he did was he was trying to recover because I think he broke his shoulder or something. I don't know what he did. He broke some limbs. And then he told me, he called me and he said, I was getting up in the middle of the night to go to use the restroom. And then he was using the bathroom standing, and all of a sudden he just fell. Another head concussion. So we sent him some NAD and glutathione patches, and he called me and he said, I can't believe it. He said, literally within 12 hours, he goes, I feel so much better. 12 hours. And so I would say that we have a lot of feedback with people that have cognitive issues, memory issues, that have been using the patches. So really, really good stuff.
I mean, to that point, even though we're primarily talking about concussions, TBI, it's actually interesting. If you look at most neurodegenerative issues, if you really dig down into the work on what are the core mechanisms, virtually all of them, from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to dementia, all have some degree of direct tie to mitochondrial function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we were talking about that on our last episode. So if you're tuning in just now, you should go back and watch the episode before this one. So really good stuff. And then I know Dr. Buzz was talking about car accidents. You get in a car accident, sometimes you slam your head against the windshield.
Well, even if you don't slam your head against a windshield, modern airbags, those blast you. If anyone has been hit by one, hope you don't. But I mean, it can save your life, but it can give you a big concussion. And just the seatbelts themselves, because remember, it's the fast acceleration, deceleration that your brain hits inside of your skull. So even if your head hits nothing, even an airbag, it's this fast stopping that causes the concussion. And we have it all the time with patients who will come in afterwards, and they, if you get in a car crash, you have a headache right afterwards. It's a concussion. That's what causes the headache. And once again, often misdiagnosed because you go to the hospital. They're just making sure you're not internal bleeding, no bones are broken. Okay, you're on your way. And in particular, I think you'd agree with this, Nick, too. As you get older, these even become more serious.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So it's important for children to get this diagnosed, but even as you get older, 50s, 60s, 70s, the concussions are much worse for you and can lead down a really slippery slope of neurodegenerative diseases. And no one wants to have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. It's these chronic, inflammatory responses in the brain that can lead to these type of things.
It's even the more immediate quality of life. long time ago, I was in a serious car accident. Walked away from it, even though there wasn't much left of the car. But the really weird thing was I felt fine for the first few hours, a little dazed, but I couldn't read. I could look at the words on a page,
That's crazy.
but I couldn't read them.
Wow.
Like it was the weirdest thing ever, and it took about 2 days. Like if I could see the letters, so I could spell THE. Oh, that's the word "the," but I could look at it, and my brain couldn't process that just that group of letters was "the." And it took about 2 days for that to fully go away, and for another week, I was not me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Get your bell rung for sure.
Wow. Wow.
So just from a quality of life, like I was basically a zombie for a week. So yeah, even without getting to the deeper and very real and very serious issues of especially a severe concussion, just like you're walking around like a zombie for a week or for a day or whatever it is. I mean that's not a good thing.
No.
Mm-mm.
No, and just in the long term effects is what I worry about, just because, you see so many people that suffer with, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, ALS, all these really bad neurodegenerative conditions. They start off somewhere, and a lot of times it's these concussions, because you're seeing it with the NFL guys now. But
Yep.
I mean, high school kids get the same type of injuries, car accidents are the same type of stuff, soccer, all these different sports. The likelihood is, we said 2 out of 10 high school kids this year will have a concussion. Half aren't diagnosed. So it's just really
Crazy.
important to know, how to diagnose these and how to treat them, and to make sure, follow the proper protocols.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, like we talked about in an earlier podcast, my son clearly had a concussion the other day playing soccer, and not knocking anybody involved, just from a descriptive perspective, but it was, "Oh, are you okay?" And my son was smart to be, "Yeah, no, I'm kind of not." So it was like, "Okay, go sit down, and like you can just sit out the rest of the game." And yeah, that's it. And
But a
then
lot of kids would say they're fine because,
But
You got-
then there's still, in most cases, there really isn't anything done about it. Because, for example, the follow up from the team perspective and all that is, before you can play again, you just have to go have a concussion assessment done. And as soon as you can pass that, come back and play soccer again. And you're like, well,
there's no treatment there. You're just kind of,
you're not really addressing anything. It's like, well, you broke your leg. Well, just stay home until you can walk again. Like, we're missing a few steps there.
yeah. Where's the PT? Where's the PT in there? And and for the brain, the PT, I think the NAD and glutathione work really good to help get the inflammation out of there, get the mitochondria in the brain working better again, and just like really clear that whole thing up. I think, at least what we've seen clinically here.
Yeah, I mean, you can go bare bones to the level of, hey, go take some ketones and, turn off all the lights for the next 8 hours and just lay down and rest. Like that alone is,
It's better than nothing,
like
for sure.
we know has a net positive impact. So, there's a spectrum of things that are known that work that we can do, but it's just, there's kind of this big air gap here where it's almost kind of just ignored.
Wow. What a great show. Awesome. Really good stuff. I love, once again, listening to Nick talk and with Dr. Buzz. Blows my mind every time. If you have any questions about our NAD or glutathione patches, you can always DM us at the Stop Feeling Like Shit podcast. If you have any questions or topics that you want us to talk about, we are going to be doing a Q&A coming up in April. So make sure that you send us all your questions, topics, or anything that you want to add. Nick, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Danielle.
Dr. Buzz, as always. So we'll see you around.